Welcome to the Model Car Hobby Headquarters Unpodcast with your host, Luka Cee. Now here he is, Luka Cee. Well, hello, my fellow car modelers. How are you doing today? I have got a really interesting guest, great guest. I have been looking forward to this one. This gentleman was a regular in Scale Auto way back in the day, and if you read those issues, when I think of this guy, that's the model that pops in my head. I remember reading this issue way back then and just loved his detail and weathering. We have Terry Jessee, and he was with Scale Auto for so many years, wrote so many great articles. I'm sure many of you know who he is. And I'm just so thrilled to have him on the show. Been looking forward to this. Thanks a ton, Terry. Come on and talk to us.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
glad to be here.
I'm glad. Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. Enough of my blah blah. Everybody who tunes into this channel hears me enough. This is about you. We want to hear about you. So let's go like all the way back to when you first got into model cars building, what got you, the whole road through everything you did, why you build what you build, and your whole thing with Scale Auto, your career with Scale Auto. It spanned a long time, and you gave us so much great information over the years and covered so many wonderful things. It never was stale. And just want to hear the story. How did it all begin?
Well, the first model car that I remember my dad brought me from the grocery store one day. I was about 9 years old, I think. And he brought me an AMT 32 Ford Coupe. And so it was about 1960, 61, something like that. And in those days, those really early versions of that kit, you could kind of push it together and then take it apart and push together a different version. And so my dad and I spent the afternoon having fun. He liked the stock coupe and I liked the hot rod, and we just went back and forth and had a pretty good time. And that's what got me started. And so I built models then until high school, which would have been about 66. And in fact, I remember the last model I built was at that time was the monogram Red Chariot Fayette.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We were on vacation in California, seeing family down there. And I was just looking for something to do on an afternoon. And so I got some kit and some glue and just stuck it together. And, and those monogram kits were so beautifully done. You didn't need to paint them. And so that was the last model I built till high school. And then it was about 8 years, I think 1974. I was married and we were living in a power plant construction town. And there wasn't an awful lot to do. And we were here in home in Billings for the weekend, and I saw a couple of model kits and got started again, and I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, nothing to do to get you back into model cars.
Yeah, that's what happened.
How old were you at that time when you came back into it then?
About 23, 24 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which really was that was that period when guys our age were, they settled down, they got married, they had families, they were working, and they were looking, they were kind of thinking about those old days when they were doing that. And there was just kind of a renaissance that started 74, 75.
Yeah.
Eventually led up to the shows and the magazine. And within 5 years, all of that was cooking.
See, this is great to talk to somebody, because I always try to cover the whole history of the hobby and how it rolled over the years. And it's nice to talk to somebody that was there at that time period when it really started taking off. And like you said, I've always called it like those years, the renaissance of the hobby. And
Really, it was.
yeah, it was, and it's just so it seemed like, you had your 60s thing where it was a toy and it was for children, and it seemed like those kids grew up like you said, and all of a sudden it kind of was dying down, and in the mid 70s
Yeah,
the hobby started picking up, but it was starting to be more adults. And that's, I think, where Gary Schmidt starting Scale Auto was kind of like, that was, it seemed like that was his whole point of that magazine.
yeah, it really was. It's really funny. There were I got involved with I don't even remember how, but I got involved with Mark Gustafson down in Salt
Mhm.
Lake. I'm in Montana.
Yeah.
Uh, got involved with Mark back and forth writing letters and doing stuff like that. He was writing for a magazine at the time called International Modeler.
Hmm.
Brick Price, who later went on to do movie miniatures, had that magazine, and they featured Dale King and some of the some really terrific model builders. But Mark was in there with some of his customs and that 161 stock Ford Galaxy,
Oh,
and
yeah.
somehow I wound up working with him, or going back and forth, and he put my name on Gary's list. And the first issue of Scale Auto was only 850, I think it was 850 copies, and you had to be on the list to get a copy. And so I got a copy of that first magazine
Oh,
and
nice.
was thrilled with what I saw, because the only thing that was out there other than that was Tim Boyd Street Rodder Modeler's Corner. And so to see a whole magazine that was devoted to model cars was a pretty big thrill. So I immediately signed up and subscribed, and went from there.
Yeah,
That was
because
79.
yeah, that's right. Because there was in the 60s and early 70s was model car. It was just no, it was car model. I can't remember.
Car model.
Car model that was just simple like that, and that
Yeah.
ended in like 74.
Yeah. There was car model or model car science.
Yes, model car science.
Carcraft was this back in the 60s. There was Carcraft was doing stuff. That was Jim Keeler.
Yes.
Uh, then Don Emmons was eventually wound up doing stuff for Rod and Custom. And Bill Newman, who was the editor at the time, really got behind model car building. And that went along pretty good until about 66. And then he got replaced,
Yeah.
Vince Murray, and they dropped all the model car stuff. So everybody kind of moved over to model car science or car modeler. Car model.
Car model, and yeah, and then that was over with, and so there was a void, and
Yeah.
by 79, it's neat. Again, speaking to you saw it kind of evolve and heard the rumblings. Gary Schmidt starting Scale Auto, I've said this several times, I believe that is why we have the hobby we have today.
Oh, yeah.
Really, really think the hobby could have possibly fizzled out.
That and the shows.
And the
Uh,
shows, and the
well,
shows I don't think could have kept on going if it wasn't for, that was the only media back then. There was definitely
yeah,
none of this.
yeah.
That's the only media that Scale Autos model cars had to show itself to the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the
The
first issue.
shows really kind of pushed the NNL at Toledo, and then the eventual
Yeah,
offshoots of that, and then Salt Lake City. And those got people fired up, and all of that was covered in the magazine. And so you're right, the magazine really was the impetus for what we have now.
oh, absolutely, and it has this. I work real hard to always mention him and all you guys. That's why I want to have you all on is to keep this history alive and everybody know it is. Yeah, it's so important to our hobby today. To remember why we got what we got. And
Yeah,
Scale Auto, all of you were writing such wonderful articles that helped us all out. We all grew as model builders because of that magazine. Again, only way to find out how the heck to wire up an engine and find out those companies like MSC Products and all that.
yeah,
I remember discovering them. It changed everything. The first Scale Auto that I brought home for me, and the whole rusting of cars. That was kind of something of my favorite thing. Weathered, rusted cars,
yeah.
and you were a big part of that for me. So, your days of, you pretty much started when, what issue was your first article in Scale Auto?
The one you showed, that was, I think, January, February '84.
Yep.
That was the dirty old Dodge. And
Yes.
that actually was a test shot.
Oh yeah.
Somehow, and I don't know, I met Tom West. And a lot of this was going on through the shows and that kind of thing. And I talked him out of a test shot. I thought it'd be fun to do a story. And I was a sheriff's deputy at the time.
Oh.
So that car supposedly represents our sheriff's office. And because our cars were that weird tan and everything. And I still remember when the magazine came out and it was on the cover, I just was blown away. I couldn't believe that.
Oh yeah. It's a beautiful shot. It is a
Yeah.
awesome.
Friend of mine named Fred Phillips took that photograph and we set it up in the driveway so it looked like it's sitting on the street in front of a house across the street.
Yeah. Total forced
And
perspective.
yeah, the funny thing that happened is when I showed up, then I took it in and I showed it to the boss, the sheriff, and he said, "Why'd you have to do a dirty one?" And I said, "Well, that's how they look all winter." And he said, "Yeah, I did." And believe it or not, after that happened, they started washing the cars more.
No kidding.
He said, he said, "I hadn't realized that they got that bad." And he walked outside one day after that and he started looking. He says, "You guys get a chance, you go wash those cars." And they got some contract with one of the automatic car washes and started washing the cars more often.
Oh, that is neat. What a cool little backstory to a
Because we're,
well-known cover.
excuse me,
And it
we were out in the
affects the real
country
world. What's
because
that?
we didn't have much city. All of our stuff was rural.
Oh
And so
yeah.
we were out on dirt roads and gravel roads and stuff. So the cars got pretty dirty.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But
I remember some guy wrote in on the letter to Scale Auto and said, "Cars don't get that dirty." And he said, "You know, out
Right.
there in Montana on the rural roads, I bet they do."
That guy was probably from here in Phoenix or Southern California.
I think it was from Detroit,
Really?
which I thought was kind of funny, but maybe they wash their cars more.
Well, it's hard, to get collected dirt onto a car when there's no body because it's rusted away.
Yeah. We ran that weird pale tan color, excuse me, for about 4 years and then went back to dark brown. Our cars had always been dark
Oh,
brown.
yeah, I like that color.
And anyway, that's what got that started. And I got hooked on the idea of doing stories.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about stories is that it's just like building a model. You're putting this thing together and you're getting all the various parts together and finally assemble it. And it's the same, very similar process. And that really hooked me on that. And so about a year later, I did a review of a Talleries 124th scale Jeep, World War II Jeep.
Oh, yeah.
That I think was the second story. I can't remember. And then the Cowboy Cadillac hit.
Yeah, the Cowboy Cadillac.
Yeah, and that was, I had built that for Salt Lake City. And a friend of mine named Vern Greenwood, he was a exquisite railroad modeler. And he knew how to do all that weathering stuff. And so he showed me all that. Showed me a lot of it. He showed me how to do the brass and all that other kind of work. And we put that stock rack together and it was brass. And so I'm sitting there at his kitchen table, managed to burn a hole in his wife's kitchen table.
Oh, that had to be just.
Yeah, that was fun. But we got all that stuff together. And Vern really did have an awful lot to do with how that looked because he knew the techniques. He was talking about low pressure air. He was running thin paint at 5 psi.
Oh, really?
To get some of those effects. And he's the one that showed me, people today are using hairspray and all those kind of techniques, chipping fluid and all that.
Yeah.
But that truck was done with baking powder, baking soda.
Yeah.
I sprayed it with primer and then dripped baking soda into the wet paint.
Yep.
Then painted the truck, got the colors on it. And I also dabbed some rubber cement in various places around. And then
Yep.
the paint dried.
I read that article and I did that on a few models after.
Yeah.
Yeah,
When
that
the
I
paint dried, I took a toothpick and I just scraped it down the side of the truck, and that's how it's got all that pitted, where that pitted finish is. And that was the
yep.
reason that those things showed up, is that Gary was intrigued by the weathering too. Gary Schmidt.
Yeah.
He
See,
said that Dodge was the first time he'd ever seen anything like that on a model car, and that's one of the reasons why I got the cover.
well, the thing about it back then, like you see so much weathering today, and there's so many builders that are just have figured it out, and they really do fantastic work in the model car world. But back then, that was just it was kind of almost sometimes looked over, like when you go to the shows, because that was what I built a lot of them in the early days, and it was my passion because of yours, and there was a few other models that I saw. My first model show, the car that I built, I still have it. It's actually back there on my shelf.
Uh,
My GTO, real quick, I happen to have. There's the catalog. Um, yeah, this was an issue I got a hold of and read that stuff, and it helped me with a lot of my crusty builds that I did. And back in those days, I was one of the only ones doing it, and I could build a model with nice paint. It definitely wasn't
well,
anything
that's what everybody was about, was shiny paint.
really shiny paint. It's just like
Everything was about shiny paint.
I love bringing real world to where I started doing it, where I have cars that I did that would be, especially like a race car or something, but I would have cars that they would look really nice on the surface. You flip it over and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, he cleans it, but it's still, the underside still gets all crusted up. And well, I tell you what, we're going to take a quick little break here, and when we get back, we want to continue on your whole thing with Scale Auto. So we'll be right back after this. All right, so we are back, and we got so many more things to talk about here. I'm like a million things are going through my mind, Terry. Getting the opportunity to finally talk to you, I discovered Scale Auto and found your articles on. I was like, I really like this weathering thing. I want to paint nice cars too, but I started doing a lot of weathered and beat up cars when nobody else in my area was doing it. And then finding your articles, there, like we said, there wasn't a lot. There wasn't a lot of model car guys beating the cars up, or even just doing a little light weathering, just to even make a nice model look more real.
There was a guy named, I can't think of his last name right now, it was Mark, and he was doing logging trucks, real heavy logging trucks, and his were weathered and dirty. And then there was Mick Greenwood,
Yeah.
who had a truck on the cover. And then Evan Hermel, he was building weathered stuff and would show up at Salt Lake City all the time. And he was doing stuff like taking a Stutz Bearcat, making a boom truck out of it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And a guy named Dave Rarely. And there was about a half dozen people that were showing up in the magazines, that were doing the stories, that were kind of encouraging that style. And so eventually it caught on. And
It took a long time. I remember it didn't get respect. It really didn't. A lot of modelers were thinking that we were copping out, that we couldn't do good paint jobs. That's why we did the, oh yeah.
that was true.
Take a try at doing what's that?
I said that was true about me.
Yeah.
Crappy painter. I've never been able to get
Really? All I know is try to get. I even did get one of my friends he was not only a really great painter, his models were fantastic. He did it for a living at a hot rod shop and got on magazines.
Oh yeah.
TV shows, and eventually he was like, I want to do some of this weathering, and he started taking a shot at that. I always felt you want to go really far with it is do a nice paint job and then beat it all up, because everything starts with a nice paint job.
Except that weathering happens in layers.
Yes, this is true.
And so there's got to be something underneath for you to play with. Whether you're sanding to fade the paint, or whether you're, doing things like chipping. And in those, back in those days, we didn't know about chipping varnish. And There's a guy named David Damick on YouTube,
Yes.
Plasmo.
Mm-hmm.
He does some amazing stuff, and he's doing chipping with sponge
Yep.
or rust paint or with a small brush, and he does that kind of thing. And we didn't know how to do that then.
Plus you
It was the model railroad and the armor guys
yeah.
that really brought that stuff to the fore. And I really think that that's one of the reasons why you're seeing as much of it now as you do, because people really like the it's different.
There's quite an art form to it, and that was the thing.
Yeah,
Like back in the day, I remember some people were trying it, and I'd see distressed models and weathered models at shows and stuff, but there was something wrong. It had too much of a sheen. They just weren't getting it right. It
they
didn't
overdid
look
it.
real. To get the realism in, and that's where I would say to a lot of guys who thought we were copping out is, well, give this a try. It's actually very difficult to do it and make it look real.
It's
And now
subtle.
and now we've got all this great products from AK and all that stuff, and I love that stuff. It took me a while to give up my old techniques, and I started playing with that, learning from like Andy at Andy's Hobby Headquarters, knowing him personally, getting to see his stuff up close, and that thing that you were talking about, the sponging. For the
Yeah,
longest time, I always felt to do chipping, you had to have something underneath. You had to get the paint off, so it was chipped. But well,
yeah,
you could get that illusion with putting more paint on with that sponge and
yeah.
using certain products that were made for that. So I
Yeah,
think
I
it's just
really had a lot of
enhanced
fun
it
doing
for
it.
us.
I really had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah,
You
it
know,
is. But back in those days, I keep looking over at your, the cop car. There is, you didn't have that back then, and you didn't really know about how to do that stuff, and that looks really real. And back then, I picked up a lot of those techniques you used on those models, and I used to use a lot of like real mud.
yeah. Actually, it works good.
Yeah, it does. But
There's real mud on that truck or that car.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. That same that
there's
whole
some of it's chipped
the
off.
whole underside of that GTO I built. Yeah, and I did that probably like in 1989. I built that late
Yeah,
'88, and I took the chassis. I painted it just a flat black, and I dunked it in a watered down mud, real, and let it sit in the sun and dry, and then I chipped all the excess away, and it gave the look I wanted. The rest of the time was Scale Auto. How long did you write for Scale Auto?
40 years. Let's see. I wrote until 2000, from 84 till 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And then I quit. I went back to school and got a master's degree and did a bunch of stuff like that. And so I wasn't modeling as much. And and I started writing for other magazines, doing different kinds of stuff, toy cars and models. I wrote for a couple of British magazines,
Oh, neat.
and I did some stuff for Model Cars magazine for Greg. But I didn't have time really because I was working and
Oh,
doing all
yeah.
that. And then in about 4 or 5 years ago, um, I can't remember who took over for Mark. I can't think of his last name. Took over for Jim Hott over at Scale Auto, and they got hold of me and asked if I'd be interested in doing a story. And one of the first thing that I did was MPC was releasing that Dodge uh, D100 pickup, the
Oh,
long
yes.
box truck. And I said, I think that'd be fun to do a story on that. How about if we do a review story? And he said, well, I want to do something a little more involved. And I said, yeah, okay, no big deal. And so that was the first story that I wrote for them coming back. And then I did a bunch of kit review stuff
Yes.
and a couple of other features. I can't remember. One of them was the Blade Runner car.
Oh, yeah, that spinner.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I did some other ones. To be honest, this is crazy. I don't remember a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. So
Somebody
much of
shows
it.
somebody shows it to me and I go, oh yeah, I did that, but I don't remember. And it, the other thing that I did the books from 99 until 2003,
Yes.
2002. I did the 4 books, and so I was still busy and still doing that kind of thing. And then, oddly enough, I had 2 stories in the last issue of Scale Auto, both reviews. One was a 27T, and the other one was a 65 Dodge Coronet. And those 2 stories showed up in the last issue. And
That's good.
so, from 84 until, I don't know, what was that, 2020 that they shut that down?
Yep.
So quite almost 40 years.
Yeah, you were definitely one of the longest running, I believe, consistent writers for that magazine. I don't think at the end you're probably the only one who I don't know. I wasn't getting the magazine towards the end. I want to pick up a couple of last issues, especially that last issue. Um, but were you like the only one writing for the magazine towards the end that was from the Gary Schmidt era?
No, Tim Boyd,
Oh, that's right. Yeah, well, there's always Tim
a lot
Boyd
of stuff.
involved. That's right.
Bill Coulter did, some small stuff. Um, I'm trying to think. There were other people, uh, but primarily Tim and I really were the kind of the guys that were there that I remember. And I feel
Yeah.
bad if I've forgotten anybody.
Tim's been such a big contributor all
Bob Downey,
Bob
Bob,
Downey.
yeah, Bob Downey. He was still doing stuff,
Yeah,
and
I got to meet Bob face to face in Atlanta. That
yeah,
wonderful show he puts on. Such a
yeah,
nice guy.
yeah. He's a really super guy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's got an open invitation to come on here.
yeah. But there were a lot of new guys: Clay Kemp,
Yeah.
Marcos Cruz. Um, I'm trying to think. They were doing some just astounding stuff,
Hmm.
just wonderful. And so I was always impressed with those guys. And it wasn't just like I said, the craft of putting together a story is like the craft of putting together a model.
Yes.
And I understand that editors go in and they do the things that they do and they change things, but uh, you can tell the guys that are putting together a quality story just by the writing, the photographs, that kind of stuff. Um, and there are a bunch of people out there that are doing some great stuff. Tim Kolakowicz is doing just
Hmm.
an amazing job. He's kind of, I don't know what his position is with Model Cars Magazine, but he's one of the guys that's pushing behind it. Larry Greenberg,
Yeah.
uh, and there's a bunch of those guys that have come in. I think Len Geisler, uh, that have come in and have really rejuvenated that magazine. And
Wow.
but
I,
they
yeah.
they're doing some pro stuff. They
They
really are.
are doing amazing stuff. That magazine has, it's unbelievable. I have said this before. The last few issues I've looked at, I've got to start getting that now. It reminds me of the old days. It reminds me of
Yes,
these magazines here. I think
it does.
they're going back to the way it was done back in the Highland
Yeah,
publication days.
yeah. It really, and it's very impressive. It's
Yes.
very impressive, and I don't miss one. We buy them. Don't have a subscription, but we've got a local hobby shop that's always got them, and so I always make sure I get one because it's just like you say, the quality of the stories and the format, and it feels like home. They really
Yes.
have done a great job with it.
Yes, they have. That's exactly, the past year, I haven't picked one up. I don't have anywhere to get it here locally. I have to get it online.
Yeah.
So now I got some catching up to do, but I have a lot of good friends of mine that get it regularly. So I just, I'm over at their house and I just, okay, I'm just here to read the magazine. We'll talk later. And I just go through it and it's, oh my goodness, these guys are doing such a fantastic job. And they are crossing over a lot with us YouTubers.
Yeah.
So with what we do on this, media, and I think we can keep a magazine going. And it's funny, there's not a lot of people that realize this. I still get in the comments when I do my little retrospectives on Scale Auto, because it's strictly a celebration of that Gary Schmidt era, the Highland Publications era. And everybody go, boy, I wish there was a magazine like that now. And it's like I've had to start saying, hey, you don't know? Go get a Model Cars magazine because it's bringing it back. It's bringing it back the way it was. And
They really have.
they are doing such a fantastic job. Are we ever going to see you in that magazine writing again or anything?
This is kind of goofy. I got a head injury in 1990, pretty bad, and working, and wound up with a tremor in my right hand. And as I've gotten older, it kind of bounced into a essential tremor, which happens to people as they get older. And so my hands, this hand, which is where I do all my work, shakes pretty bad. And so this is kind of stupid, I don't know, but I don't feel like I'm building models that are magazine quality anymore.
Yeah, maybe.
So, I look at it and I think, that's not, I mean, I had fun, but that's not something I want to put in a magazine.
Yeah.
I've had inquiries, both Tim Kidwell at Comback and then Tim Kolankowitz at Model Cars asked me if I'd be interested in doing some stories. And I told them the same thing. At this point in my life, I'm just not building magazine quality models anymore. And plus, it's a hassle.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
It is.
And I think people don't understand that. If you're doing a model for a magazine, you're doing two jobs at once. Because you're building, you stop, you take pictures. You build, you stop, you take pictures. You build, you stop, you take pictures. You do notes, you do reference material, you're doing all that kind of stuff. And so you're doing two jobs at the same time. And I'm to the point where I'm kind of, I've written somewhere over 500,000 words about building model cars.
Yeah, you have.
And I said, I was sitting there and I think, I said most of what I wanted to say. Actually, one of the things that's kind of funny is that I'm still building car models, but I got into 35th scale trucks. And I'm only built, I don't build tanks or anything like that, but I've gotten into 35th scale trucks, Jeeps. I'm from Jeeps up. Last one I did was a Vietnam gun truck called Iron Butterfly. Very famous Vietnam truck. Those are they're frustrating because the Chinese have gotten into this thing where they're trying to cram as many parts as possible into a model.
Yeah.
So, I've got one upstairs in my hobby room. It's an Iraqi gun truck. 670 parts.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, you're gluing these little tiny thingies and you can't see them. And they're so small. And some of these parts are like a millimeter bit long. And that little part of that is frustrating, but I love the look of those trucks. And I like the weathering. And like you said, the weathering has really gotten to be a lot of fun for me. And I still do weathered cars. I did a Dodge pickup about 2 years ago. It's kind of a turquoise. I took a Warlock kit that I'd been hoarding forever.
Nah. Yeah.
It had an All-American Models resin box in it, which is the most accurate one.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And unfortunate that, he's not doing that anymore.
No, I know.
But,
I remember that. Yeah, that was one of the one of the really good resin casters.
But I put that on that, that short box Dodge or short wheelbase Dodge, and I had fun with it, weathering it, dirtying it up. And I did a Chevelle Malibu wagon for Tim Kidwell, and I said, now it's got to be, if you're doing this review stories, it's got to be box stock. I mean, that's just a requirement.
Yeah.
I said, well, can I have some fun with this? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I just do kind of weathered. And so what I did was I looked for the look I want was a car on the back row of a used car lot that's got a lot of weather time in it.
Mm-hmm.
And some kid buys it and uses it for his surf wagon. John Grishula from AMT liked that Malibu an awful lot. And he got a hold of me and he said, hey, we got this new little Nova station wagon that we're doing. He said, how about if you did one like that? I said, what do you want for like a story or something? No, he said, just do one. He said, send me some pictures. And so I did. In that kit, there's an official UFO search vehicle decal.
Yes.
And so I looked at that and I thought, okay, we got some old desert rat out there in the desert down around Roswell, New Mexico, looking for evidence of UFOs. And so I had a lot of fun with that. I weathered it, knocked a lot of the chrome off it, left little holes, and all kind of stuff like that. And I had an awful lot of fun with that. And so I still am building cars. In fact, it's really funny. My wife was talking about it the other day. She said, I don't like the military trucks as well. I said, you're kidding. She said, no, I really don't like the military trucks. She said, I like the cars better. And I said, well, like what? She said, well, I really like the hot rods. And so right now, one of the things I'm working on right now is a 32 Ford sedan, highboy, fenderless, done in yellow, black wheels, black, kind of old school. It's got a Hemi in it. I've taken parts from about 5 kits and stuck them together to do that. So, she's been at this with me for so long that she's not really into it, but she knows it.
Yeah.
Oh, one of those kind of things.
Been with you for a while, so has to.
Yeah, she's got an educated viewpoint, which is, for me is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But, she's been with me. We were married in 73 and it was a year later that I started building models and so she's been here that long and seen all the stuff, and I always show them to her when I'm done with them, and she knows what she's looking at, which is really strange. Don't expect that.
Well, just by natural osmosis, she's going to have a knowledge built up of this stuff.
Yeah, she knows that, and so that was one of the things she told me. She said, those are beautiful, but I really don't like the trucks as well as I like the hot rods. So,
oh, cool.
So I'll build a hot rod.
You're watching the Luka Cee channel on YouTube.
I tell you, I've been looking at the pictures that you sent me, and like that Nova, I gotta say, Terry, I still think you got it. that Nova could be in the magazine for sure. But yeah, I understand doing this kind of stuff. It's just like the YouTube thing. People don't understand how difficult it is. That's why I don't do a lot of build videos.
A lot of work.
It is very tough to shoot a video and build a model at the same time. So
David Damick does one a month.
Yeah. Oh yeah. See, if I was put on a time schedule that I had to have something submitted, I would get fired. I got to be my own boss, and it comes out when it comes out.
Who's the HBI guy? Craig. I can't think of his last name. He's doing 2 models a week.
Yeah.
And his purpose is to show you what's in the box and how it goes together, and are there any problems. So, he's not doing contest models such, but he's doing an amazing service for people.
Well, yes, that's the point of his thing. It's not about building a show quality model. He's showing the model kit and how it goes together.
Techniques that he uses.
That's tough.
And you can see he's been picking up stuff from other people.
Yeah.
I mean, he's using techniques that I saw first with Plasmo. There's a guy named, the YouTube name is Night Shift, and he does an awful lot of military stuff. But Craig has been adapting that to the car models and to the other stuff that he's building. And he's built up a huge following. And
Oh, yes.
what's really strange when you look at it, if you want to know what something looks like first, you go over to HPI guys,
I do it all the time.
because he's getting stuff before anybody. And he's
Yep.
getting stuff from all over the world. He's getting resin kits. He's getting, kits I never heard of, coming from companies I barely heard of. And he puts those things on his channel, and it's really fun to watch, because it helps you look at a model kit and say, okay, I see a problem here. That's something I'm going to have to work on. I see, and he tends to kind of minimize,
Yeah.
but at the same time, he's showing you step by step how these things are going together. And so it really is it's a neat service. It's a wonderful service that I appreciate.
Absolutely. And it's a lot of work. I don't know how he does.
Yeah.
I would not be able to take that task. I would not be able to. Here comes the boss. I would not be able to be on deadline and getting these kits and having to that would be stressful. I've got a lot of other things going on with my other job right there. It's good that somebody's doing that. I check in all the time when there's a kit coming out that I want to know how it's going to be. That is the place to go. He's going to show you how show you what's inside the box before anybody does. He gets that stuff so early.
And the thing about David Damick, Plasmo,
Yeah.
is he doesn't build anything out of the box. Maybe 2 or 3 that I've seen. He's always modifying things, and he uses some really interesting techniques. He did a Ferrari 330 P4,
Mm-hmm.
and the kit has the wrong mirrors on. So he used Milliput, the epoxy putty,
Yeah.
British, and he used that to form the housings, and then came back in and he does all this stuff. And one of the things that I like about him is when he screws up, he lets you see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did a Porsche 917 years ago, where I really became a fan. He had it all painted and decaled and ready, and he hit it with some clear lacquer, ruined the paint job. And he went, I was really sad. And so he takes you back through and shows you how he fixed it, what he had to do. And at the end, you look at the model, you say, ain't no way. And so that's one of the things about those 2 guys, and they're really my favorites. I never miss. I always, I check HBI guys twice a week. I'm always watching to see what David Damick's doing next month, and he does anything. He's like Craig. He does car, he does an airplane, he does a tank, he does a truck, he does something all the time, and so those have become the magazine.
Yes.
And they're free as long as you don't mind putting up with the ads, and it's just they have kind of become the magazine. One of the things that I think is kind of sad is that if you go over on some of the message boards around, there are guys who not only haven't ever seen the magazine, but are proud of the fact that they've never looked at one of the magazines.
Really?
I always think that's kind of sad, because like what you're doing, there's a lot of history out there.
Yes.
I don't want this to sound arrogant, but every now and again you'll see some guy and he comes up and he's got this great new technique, blah, 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 blah. I did it 35 years ago, but nobody's ever seen it because they're not looking at the magazine then, or they weren't born. And sometimes that's kind of funny. But every now and again I'll see something either in one of the magazines or on a website, and some guy's talking about some technique, and I go, yeah, okay. Been there, done that a long time ago. And and so you just, there's some satisfaction in looking and saying, yeah,
Yeah.
we've had a lot of fun. We've had a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that's why I love to show the old magazine and bring some of these people that weren't around back then to show what was going on back then and why we have what we have today. Because guys like you and Tim Boyd, everybody who was writing for the magazine back in those days. This is why I got so excited when I discovered Tim Bungard was in my club.
Yeah.
I showed a magazine that had an article that was really important to me back in the day. I learned something from, and I'm going on, and I'm even saying in the video, "Hey Tim, if you're out there, contact me. I'd love to have you on the Unpodcast." And come to find out, I'm friends with the guy.
Yeah.
I didn't put two and together because
He had a little magazine that didn't last very long, just a couple of 3 or 4 issues that I got. And one of the stories he did was the Jimmy Flintstone goldenrod, that great big long, and I've got one and I'm trying to figure out how the heck am I going to do that window? How do I make that window look shiny without making it look like it's painted? And, should I put a piece of plastic over it or, and that was, but anyway, what he did was he took some clear acrylic and painted one side of the model, one side of the window, and he let that dry. Then he turned it over and he painted the other side of the window, and the paint blends together. There's no line. And that was the thing that he did. So I tried it with mine, and it looks like a piece of glass.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah. And so, Tim Bongard's been doing stuff, and you pick up stuff from all over.
Oh, yeah.
The magazine really did. It was a showcase. It was your education. It was, here's a new trick that somebody discovered and it works really well and it's goofy and nobody would have ever thought of it except somebody tripped over it. Or you're trying to solve a problem and you come up with an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the magazines were about.
Yes, 100%.
And so, and so an awful lot of the YouTube channels have turned into that.
Yeah, that was my whole point of starting this channel 5 years ago. Is I was like, I was more into, instead of doing builds, there was plenty of those around, is I wanted to be a commentary of the hobby, or a visual version of the magazines. I really wanted to do what Scale Auto was doing, and talk about things in the hobby, bring in the people that are in the hobby. I do a lot of stuff that is about the people in the hobby more so than the plastic kits we get. Yeah. And I just think it's important stuff to bring to the public, and for all of us who are really enjoy this model car hobby so much, to learn a little bit more about it and where things come from. I find it interesting, fascinating. I always love that. I love, like you said, telling a good story. I loved reading Scale Auto. I learned a lot about the history before I came in from a lot of the older guys in my club. I listened to their stories of how things were, and then reading about stuff in Scale Auto, and then getting back issues and learning more and more about the hobby. I think it was just so important. It helped me with my enjoyment of it all. So what are your plans now for the future of you continuing on in the hobby? Are you still going to model shows? Are you going to be going to Salt Lake, this last one?
Yeah, we're planning on going down. Tim Boyd is talking about being down there. He hasn't been there in a number of years. And it really, it's the last one.
Yep.
And
a lot of people going because of that.
Yeah. And so we're planning on going down. We were regulars for years. Mm-hmm. And then after Andy left and the magazine was taken off, the stories that I was doing, after about the 84, 86 is when the stories started showing up. And then I started Light Commercial in 86. And that was a one-time shot. But they got all kinds of letters that said, let's do some more. And so I wound up doing that for 16 years.
And to find something fresh for that every one, and they're great articles. I love that.
The thing is that there was so much stuff going on
Mm-hmm.
that it wasn't hard. I was getting, I was getting a lot of stuff sent to me, and especially for the resin casters, because they really didn't have that kind of an outlet. And so, in fact, that's why I switched over to resin kits and parts, which was, a change in that column.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a lot of hate mail. Not really hate mail. I just got a lot of letters. I mean, what happened to light commercial? Because people just loved that.
Yeah.
But I was getting a lot of stuff in the mail, and people say, "Well, you're getting that stuff for free," and I said, "Yeah." And then I gave it away. We would have, I didn't keep anything. I would give it to people. We'd do a contest where you do something and you'd get a whole box full of stuff. And so, I never felt obligated. And if somebody sent me something I didn't like, that I thought was subpar, I'd send it back and say, okay, these are the problems I have with this. I'm sorry, but I can't use it in this state. And, but, a lot of the all-American models, the Model House, I can't remember. There were 4 or 5 resin casters who was sending me stuff. AMT was sending me stuff. Revell was sending stuff. And plus I was digging around and always looking, what's interesting. So that went on for, a long time. And it was just an awful lot of fun because it was my area. I like trucks and cars and pickup trucks. We did a thing, the Chevy Caprice.
Yes.
We started a letter writing campaign, and what would happen is I did a letter, had a photograph, and this was a square Caprice, it'd be an 88 or 89, and wanted to do a Caprice cop car. And so if you would send me a stamped self-addressed envelope, I would send you out that letter. Then you could sign it and send it into Monogram or Revell. I can't even remember who we were pushing it toward. And the kind of the weird thing that happened was I was down at Salt Lake City in '90, and Bob Johnson came up. We were sitting and having dinner, and Bob sat down with us and he was talking, and he said, we're doing the Caprice, but we're not doing that square boxy one. We're doing the new aerodynamic one. And I said, what new aerodynamic one? And he said, oh, he said, he said, you can't talk about that. And I said, yeah, okay, that's fine. He said, but they're completely redoing the Caprice. He said, you're going to be amazed at what that looks like. Well, everybody thought it looked like Namu the killer whale. But but eventually we got that kit.
Yeah.
The neatest things that ever happened to me, we were down in Salt Lake, and the girls had gone out and they were going to go shopping and doing some stuff. And they had Hill Air Force Base, which is a museum for the U.S. Air Force, and there's a whole bunch old aircraft out there. And they've got displays in the building and all kinds of stuff. And Bob Johnson was there, and he wanted to take some pictures. And so I said, well, come with me, because I got a car, because I drove down. And it's 600 miles, which is just a day. And John O'Neill from AMT said, can I go too? I said, hell, I don't know. Get in the car. And so we took off. And they started talking shop.
Oh, boy.
And Bob looked over at me and he said, you haven't heard a thing. I said, fair enough. Because, I'm an ex-cop and I'm a counselor. And so I know about confidentiality. And so I said, yeah, no problem. And they started talking shop and started talking about new products and started talking about some of the problems they'd had you remember when they both came out with the 67 Chevelle?
Yes.
At the same time?
Yeah.
And they were talking about the 50 olds, but Monogram heard that AMT or Revell heard, I don't know who it was, heard that AMT was doing a 50, so they canceled theirs. AMT heard that Revell was doing a 50, so they canceled theirs.
Mm.
And they couldn't talk together.
No.
That would be antitrust stuff.
Yeah.
And so here they are in my car, and we went down to Hill Air Force Base and looked around, looked at all the old airplanes, and then got back in the car, and they kept talking shop. And that was probably one of the most fascinating afternoons I have ever had.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it was just amazing to me.
That is so cool. Wow. That's amazing.
It was totally open. He said, you can't say anything. I said, you got it. I'm fine, guys. After we got back, which was really funny, I had several people come up to me and said, you took John and Bob down to, and I said, what'd they talk about? And I said, airplanes. Yeah, because I just said, hey,
That's the easiest way.
I can't talk about what they said.
That's awesome. That's too bad we never got that square Caprice. I always loved that car. I would have loved to have seen that come out in a model kit form.
Well, Monogram was going to do a Diplomat. And they had drawings and everything all ready to go. And somebody in their new products committee decided that wasn't going to be a viable possibility. So they did some thing with claws. I can't remember what they called it. There was
I remember that.
The monster truck. Never heard from that again.
Yeah.
That Diplomat would be selling today. And it was just one of those. The other one that really always kind of made me sad was I was talking with Bill Depew, who was he was a designer and engineer, worked for MPC, AMT, well, AMT first, MPC, did some work and did a bunch of work for Lindbergh as a freelancer because Lindbergh didn't have a staff. They would hire guys like John O'Neill and Bill and those guys, and they would design a kit. And one of the kits that Bill had done had all the drawings ready and everything was ready to go, was a 54 Dodge Power Wagon, the military style Power Wagon.
Wow.
And then Lindbergh got bought out by some investment group, and all that stuff got canceled.
Oh, man.
And that was one of those.
Cool.
In fact, Bill was, he was a lot of fun. He told me some great stories. One of my favorite was this is 67 or 68. They'd just done the Beverly Hillbillies truck. And they were also, MPC did a lot of work for Airfix.
Yes.
And they went back and forth. They had the Aston Martins and the James Bond Toyota Roadsters, and they they went back and forth all the time. And they had done, Bill was working on a model of the Pinta, Christopher Columbus middle ship.
Yeah.
Into Santa Maria. And he was working on a model of the Pinta, and they had a test shot, and he was sitting at his workbench, and he's sitting there, and he thought, so he's got this chassis from the Beverly Hillbillies truck, and he starts carving up the hull of this boat to stick it on the back of the Beverly Hillbillies truck. And George Toteff comes by, and he goes, and George confirmed this story, but he comes by and he says, what the hell is that? And Bill says, he's just doing, he says, finish that, just get it together, bring it to the new products meeting. And so he brought it to the new products meeting, and somebody at the table says, no, George. But show rods were big.
Yeah.
George likes stuff like that. Talking to George Toteff was really a fascinating interview.
I bet.
With a hoot.
I bet.
And really profane. He swore a lot, and they said he was kind of a cranky old fart, but when I talked to him, it was great. He said, I want to do this. And so they kind of fooled around with it. They sent it out when they kind of got to where they were going to go. They sent it out to Harry Bradley, the car designer. And he was the one that kind of finished it up and called it the Jolly Roger. Wow. And that's how that kit came about.
Wow.
Yeah. Just kind of fun things like that you learn as you were going. And one of the things that I've always been so gratified by was two occasions, really. One was I sent George one of the books, and he had kept my phone number. You can't believe my phone bill when I was working on that book. This is Hot Rod Model Kits.
Yeah.
because I was doing all the interviews by phone. And he called me back and he said, I just read that book. And he said, I read the chapters on AMT and NBC. He said, nobody has ever quoted me as correctly as you did. He said, that
Nice.
was a terrific job. He said, you got all the information right. And there's a fun thing about that. George said that they did the 32 Ford Coupe first, and then they did the Roadster. And I said, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's not right, because the Roadster came out first. And I asked him about it, in fact, twice during the interview. And I said, hey, I missed out something. I missed something. I said, now you said you guys did the Coupe first, and then you did the Roadster. He said, yeah, that's how that went. We put it in the book. I got all kinds of people say, no, that's backwards. I don't know what's backwards, but I know what George told me. And he said that I quoted him correctly, right? The other funny story about that was Mark Gustafson gave me Ed Roth's phone number, because Ed was living down in Manti, Utah then.
Mm-hmm.
And I called him up and I said, I'm working on this book and, on the Revell stuff. And I said, I was wondering if I could do an interview with you. And he said, no, I said, I don't do interviews. And I said, oh, really? He said, nah, some guy in New York wrote that I didn't build my own cars. He said, so I'm not doing any more interviews. I said, well, okay, I'm sorry that's the case. I said, I got in a lot of trouble for drawing rat think in class. And he started laughing, and he laughed kind of like Herman Munster, just ho, ho, ho. And he said, tell you what, he said, you got questions? I said, yeah. He said, here's my email. Here's my email. Ed Roth's email? So he said, here's my email. He said, you send your questions down to me. I said, okay. So about 3 days later, I get this email back, and it's Ed answering my questions. And the sidebars for the book couldn't be more than 750 words. This was 745. I called Steve Hendrickson, who was the late Steve Henry, a wonderful guy, really my editor. I called him up and I said, you can't believe this. And I sent him an email, while I'm talking to him on the phone. And he says, oh my God, we got to have that. I said, find out what he wants. So I called him back and I told him what was going on. And I said, the editor would really like to include this in the book. He said, okay, you can have it if you don't change a comma. And I said, okay, not a problem. I said, what do you need for it? And he said, I want 6 books, one for each of my kids and one for me. And I said, what else? And he said, that'll do.
Wow.
The funny thing is a Royal Glazer, who was the head of Revell with her husband Lou, spelled her name Royle. Ed spelled it Royel. Right?
Yeah.
So I called Steve. I said, we got a problem. I said, he has misspelled Royal Glazer's name. And he told us, don't change a comma. Well, I guess we're just going to have to misspell her name. And she called me on that. She said, you misspelled my name. Yeah. And I explained why. And she said, well, he always was interesting to work with. And, and that was in one more story. This
please.
Cowboy Cadillac.
This is great. I love this.
Okay. Well, this is part of the legend.
Mm.
But Vern Greenwood, my buddy that taught me about this, he said, you got to put one of these in the truck. And I said, I got to put one of what in the truck? There was a company called Micros Corporation that had a product line called Olfactory Airs. And what it was these little packets that were about, I don't know, 1/4 inch, maybe a little more.
Mm-hmm.
And you could put them on your railroad layout, and they smelled like coal bin and machine shop. But you put a little drop of water on them, and they'd make this smell, and it would come up off your thing. And so he said, I got one for you. He says, you got to put this in there. And so there was one called Stockyard. And so, he demonstrated it, and oh God. And so we put it in between the cab and the box. It's still in there. And took it down to Salt Lake City, and you take an eyedropper and you put a little water on it, and it would smell like a stockyard. I mean, it really smelled like a stockyard. And so we've got that sitting on the table, and every now and again, Mike Sigmund was we were hanging out, and I was talking to Mike, and I said, "Watch this." And I went over and I put a little water on that thing. Then we went back over and sat. And these guys, they're sitting there and they're looking over the model, and they're looking at models that are behind it. And all of a sudden, you see them go. And they're looking at other guys, and they're checking their shoes, and they're looking around. They're trying to figure out, what's going on. And so, and the whole weekend,
gamey around here.
Ed, it smelled bad. It smelled bad.
That's wonderful.
So Ed was a guest of honor down there in '86. So I said, we were talking. I said, he said, "You got anything in the show?" And I said, "Yeah." So I took him over and I looked at the pickup, and he's looking at the pickup, and he goes, and again, it was dirty when everything was shiny. And he said, "That's not a model." He said, "That is art."
Absolutely.
I said, "I want to show you something about that. I want to show you something about that art." And so I got the eyedropper, and he goes, "Whoa." He said, "What is that?" So I explained to him what it was. I said, "Come on over, let's sit down." And we were sitting, and the same thing. Guys checking their shoes, sniffing, looking at other guys. And Ed was just in hysteria. He was laughing, and we were laughing, and we just had a big time playing with that. And somebody asked me probably a month ago, "Does it still smell?" And I tried it not long ago and got hollered at.
Oh, that is because I've heard this legend, this story. I mentioned that to you is, that's the model that smells. I heard or read about it. I mean, I've always known that about the cowboy Cadillac. That is hilarious.
It still smells.
That's fantastic. That's some good product right there.
Yeah, it's what, almost 40 years old. It's
Yeah.
36
That
years.
has been something that has sat with me that I've always, I would love to have. I was thinking it was an oil smell and all that. I didn't I had forgotten over the years, or if I even realized that it was a stockyard smell. That's even better. Wow, that just made that story even better to me. That's fantastic.
That's what happened. And
that is so neat.
Oh, that one to Vern too. But it was in that little packet. It's cloth. It's not paper. It's cloth, and so it's apparently it's still there, because I'm not kidding.
Wow, that brings another dimension to model car building.
It's unfortunate that company's out of business.
That's too bad. I would love to get a hold of some.
But no, it's a lot of fun. And I think oil would be, the oil dripping or an oil.
Yeah, the whole like the junkyards. What you smell when you're at a junkyard.
Yeah, that would be a neat thing. And I don't know that it'd probably be easier to replicate that now.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Stockyard.
Stockyard. That's a risky one, but boy, that's funny.
Oh, it was. You should have seen it. We were in hysterics laughing.
Oh, geez. To have a candid camera on that one
for 3 days, and I just every now and again things would get a little quiet, and we put a little water on it.
That's the best.
But
that's
where it came from.
Oh, thank you for that story. That changed that story for me. That's so cool.
Yeah, that's probably one of my favorite stories.
I tell you, Terry, we could go on. This is all going to go in this is getting on YouTube. I might have to have you come back on some other time too. I love talking these stories about the old days, and talking about model cars is just a fun thing for me. I want to really thank you so much for responding back to me, coming on. Like I said, as me as a doing the modern era of journalism, model car journalism. That's what I started this channel for, was to be more of a model car journalism, like what Scale Auto was. Scale Auto and all you guys, well, you were my heroes of model cars. It was because of the stories that you talked about, how you wrote, the things you talked about, what I learned about the hobby from all of you guys reading the old scale autos. That's where I hold you guys really high. Is that something I always had an interest in? I would love to write for Scale Auto one day. And this medium gave me that opportunity. I'm not the greatest writer. I don't know if I'm the greatest YouTuber, definitely not. But I'm real passionate about this hobby. You guys were always passionate. You could tell in the writings that you guys did, and the true love you have for this hobby. And we need more of that. And we're getting so many YouTubers now. When I came on, that was what I set out to do, was to basically tell the stories, show tips, all the stuff, everything that was in Scale Auto. You learn stuff, you learn tips, you learned about kits coming out, kit reviews, the stories.
Gary Schmidt told me one time, he said, there's a lot of guys out there that are buying Revel kits, and they twist the parts off the tree and they glue the model together without painting it, and they stick it up on a shelf. And he said, that's probably about 25 or 30% of the hobby. And then there's guys that are, really getting in there, and they're putting detail and they're working on the paint. And he said, that's probably 25% of the hobby. And then there's guys that are just going nuts. And he said, and that's 25% of the hobby. And the guys that are doing the contest models, that's another 10%.
Yep.
He said, what the guys that are doing the shows, the guys that are writing the stories, the guys that are making resin kits and aftermarket accessories and all of a sudden, all that kind of stuff, he said, that's less than 10%.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you got to remember, that's where you live now. And he said, so there's a responsibility that's associated with that. One is you keep your mouth shut. The other one is you don't take advantage of it.
Yes.
And he said, because if you do, then the word gets out and all of a sudden you get cut off. But he said, it's that 10% that really that keep the momentum up.
Yes.
And so that's kind of where you are, Chris, I wish I knew his last name, but the HPI guys.
I did. I can't remember it.
Yeah. But, he's one of those, and you're one of those. And David Damick, he gets some weird kits nobody's ever heard of.
Oh, yeah.
And those are the guys that kind of make the hobby, and the guys at Model Cars Magazine, to a lesser extent, the guys that are still doing the stuff for Fine Scale.
Yeah.
Did you notice how much car content they had this month? They had 3 major stories in there.
Oh, yeah? They're starting to put, they've got a little bit of competition now, don't they?
Yeah, they're trying to, because they realize, I think they understand that was a financial decision.
Yeah. Oh, and totally understandable.
They weren't getting the advertising money.
No.
They weren't getting the sponsors. They weren't getting all that kind of stuff. And it got to the point where the money, it probably was costing them more to do it than they were making from it. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes a business decision. But those are the people that make the momentum.
Yes.
And they're the ones that keep the momentum up. One guy playing in his basement, building model cars is not going to do it. Those are the people that make things happen. And that's why I'm grateful for Tim and all the work that he's done with model cars, and Larry Greenberg and everybody who brought that back. And I'm grateful for the guys that are doing the stuff online, and I'm grateful for the guys that are doing the stuff on YouTube, because that's where the momentum.
Yes, and that is my drive. That's why I'm reaching out, having you on this, and so many of the other guys, and why I do the shows I do, and trying to keep everybody out there informed and remembering the history, because I've had several videos. Every time I do a video on the old Scale Auto, I am just, Gary Schmidt is really, he what he did, if he didn't come along, I really don't believe we would have what we have today, because Scale Auto really took this hobby to another level. Everything you said is 100%, and that's all we had back then. And so many kicks happened because of you guys, like you're talking about what, the conversations you heard in that car, and getting those guys together, and actually starting to create relationships with the people that are making the models, and they're respecting you guys and hearing what you're saying, and you're reaching out to the public of what they want. A great example, a lot of people don't remember, I really want to do a story on this, is the AMT 66 Chevelle. That completely, totally happened because of Scale Auto stepping in, Scale Auto Enthusiast, saying, what do you, I remember those, there would be a ballot for what is a kit you'd like to see. And that 66, 67 Nova kept coming up, and what you want to see in a kit. And that thing was a breakthrough, because it had not only the amount of detail and accuracy in it, beautiful car that was so wanted and well done, but you had two versions. You had a street version, and you had that Pro Street, which was hot. That would never have happened if it wasn't for Scale Auto Magazine, Scale Auto Enthusiast.
Probably not. And there were some clunkers that showed up for that same reason. But the thing is that, you really got some great stuff because of the magazine.
Yes, definitely.
Taught me how to write. Gary Schmidt taught me how to write. I've got a bachelor's degree in English.
Oh, yeah?
Right? So I thought I was a pretty good writer.
Yeah.
When I started working for him, he'd come in and say, okay, this is wordy. It needs to be sharper. You need this. You need to do this. This needs to be more crisp. And I'm hearing words that I understand, language that I understand. And so you really started working. And the other thing, Don Emmons and Tim Boyd are my heroes.
Yeah.
And I call that kind of writing Emmons Boyd anyway. But there's a style that you see in the magazine that those guys did. And it's crisp. There's no extra. It's just nice and lean, and it just tells you the story, and it's great. And that's where you wanted to be. And Gary was really big about pushing that.
Yeah.
And so, in kind of a way, and I wrote him after he retired. I wrote him and I said, I wanted you to know I had great teachers. I really did. I had great, didn't matter whether it was my bachelor's, my master's, high school. I just had great teachers. But the person that taught me how to write for magazines and books was you.
Wow. Yeah.
And he was very touching. Yeah.
You can tell he was a great leader. What he did with that magazine, you guys were just, it takes someone like that to have a group of people like all of you to create what you create to bring to us. Like you said, the average, people out there, they don't realize what it takes to do that stuff.
Yeah.
And you got to have someone who is definitely the leader of it and really knows how to point everyone in the right direction. He did an amazing job.
He really did.
I will always make sure, to keep his name alive and what he did, and all of you guys. And I want a really big thank you for coming on, telling these stories. So Terry, there's a little thing I don't know if you're aware of. I have a little signing off thing I say, and on the Unpodcast here, I always ask the guest to do it. Do you know that saying? Can you
gluing your fingers
rip it out
together?
for us?
Yeah. Hey, keep gluing your fingers together, keep cutting that styrene, and we'll see you in the next video.
Excellent. Thank you so much, man. This was a treat.
For me too.
Oh, thank you.
It's fun to remember.
It is. It's a lot of fun. And the other thing I always say is, why do we build model cars? Because they're fun. That's a simple one, huh? That's right to the point. Here's the producers.